Lazarus was dying, and no one seemed to know why. The physicians had tried everything, but he wasn't getting any better. Every day he got thinner and more pale. Finally, the doctors said the end was near. They said it was time for friends and family to say their goodbyes. That's why we sent for Jesus. He loved Lazarus so much. We knew he would want to be there. I am Martha. Lazarus is my brother. Mary is our older sister. Our parents died when we were still teenagers, so we're very close. Lazarus is the only remaining male in our family. If he died with no children, the family name would die with him. Almost as bad. He is the only male representative for our family. If he died, Mary and I would be left completely vulnerable and exposed. Everyone came as soon as they heard the news. Everyone, that is, except Jesus. Jesus seems to have dawdled over long. It was painful not to have him at the funeral. It was more insulting to know that he chose to miss the funeral altogether. People were expected to show up when a friend was dying. That was the deal. And who knows? Maybe he could have done something. But now it was too late. Lazarus, our brother, was dead. Even now, it's hard for me to say those words out loud. Lazarus, our brother, is dead. Most of us Jews believe that the soul might linger about for up to 3 days. But that's it. It's all over. Jesus knew that too. After 4 days, whatever might have been left of Lazarus was dead and gone. Jesus was unforgivably late. We could understand some hesitation on his part. After all, not long before, his opponents in Galilee had sought to stone him to death. They accused him of blasphemy, and they wanted to arrest him and execute him on the spot. It's no wonder that he slipped away across the Jordan River. But now Lazarus was dead. Jesus knew it. We had sent word. He had to come back, no matter what the risk was. And finally, he decided to come. He could still pay his respects. Mary and I, however, weren't sure we could ever forgive him for not being there soon enough. Normally, the women folks stay inside the house during the mourning period. But now in our family, all the men folk were dead and gone. Then I heard from the local gossips that Jesus was in the area and headed our way. I couldn't stand it 1 second longer. I put on my cloak and headed out the door. I met him on the road to our farm. was more than a bit testy when I found him. Lord, if you had been there, I grumbled, my brother would not have died. I didn't really believe that, but I was hurt and angry, and I wanted Jesus to know that I was hurt and angry. But as soon as I said it, I knew I'd gone too far. I still had hopes for something, anything. And I didn't want to alienate my one last hope. But even now I backtracked. I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. I prayed, I pleaded that this might really be true. And then he gave me the pat answer that every Jewish mourner hears. Your brother will rise again. Yes, I know the theology. I know that he will rise again, I murmured as I looked at my feet. I know that he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day. Really, Jesus, that's all you've got? I wanted to scream another question. But what about today? Please, Jesus, no more pie in the sky and a sweet by and by. Lazarus is dead now. Mary and I are torn to pieces now. Our world is shattered now. Please, dear Lord, don't talk to us about what might be someday, somewhere. As I shouted those protests inside my pounding head, Jesus spoke again. I am the resurrection and the life, he said to me. He must have seen my confusion because he continued. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. I had no idea what he was talking about. But it didn't matter at that point. He was talking about Lazarus being alive again. That's all that mattered to me. He asked me, do you believe this? Believe this. I had seen Jesus in action. He turned water into wine, gave sight to the blind. Wind and water even obeyed him. And he fed 5,000 people with almost nothing. He gave people their lives back. Believe this? Absolutely. Yes, Lord, I shouted. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. I ran back to the house to get Mary. I knew that Jesus wanted to tell her as well. I was still somewhat put out by the fact that he delayed so long. Mary, on the other hand, was downright irritated. Before I could stop her, she lit into him just like I did. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Well, Jesus was done with second-guessing and accusations. We didn't realize that all of this was as hard on him as it was on us. buried, Jesus snapped. Lord, the other said, come on, we'll show you. When we got to the tomb, Jesus started crying. I felt so ashamed. Until that moment, I had thought of nothing but my own grief. It hadn't occurred to me that Jesus had lost his friend as well. The crowd was confused by all of this. Some of them marveled at his love for his brother. Others spit out their skepticism. Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man, they wondered, have kept this man from dying? They would get their answer soon enough. Jesus was still irritated, but his frustration was no longer with me or with Mary. I suddenly realized that he was angry with death itself. I had never seen him so stern and resolute. Not even when he forced down opponents who wanted to stone him to death. Death was the real enemy, and this was the real battle. Take away the stone, Jesus said to some of the men. I was horrified. No, 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 I shouted. Don't do that. It's been 4 days already. What's left of my poor brother is going to stink to high heaven. I had no idea what was coming. But I did know that I didn't want people getting sick all over my brother's tomb. He looked at me and he smiled. Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? I nodded and backed up. The men rolled away the stone. We didn't smell a thing. Something strange was happening. After that, I could barely breathe. Could Jesus really do something after all? Jesus put his prayer shawl over his head and began to pray. Father, I thank you for having heard me, he chanted. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. He put the shawl back on his shoulders. He gathered himself up and shouted as loudly as he could, Lazarus, come out! For a few moments, there was absolute silence. Even the birds had stopped their chirping. And then there was a sound inside the tomb. It sounded like cloth rubbing against the rock. Then I saw him. I saw my brother. He was shuffling toward the doorway of the tomb. His hands and feet were bound with strips of cloth, just as they were when we laid him to rest. His face was wrapped in a cloth to keep his jaw from sagging. And he was trying to speak. Jesus said to the men, unbind him and let him go. Time went into slow motion for a while. I thought about some words my brother spoke once about Jesus. What had come into being in him was life, Lazarus had said, and the life and shock and joy. The funeral turned into a feast. Hundreds of people were there. Many of them had been opposed to Jesus and his mission. A number of skeptics had to, shall we say, rethink their positions. For those who remained opposed, this was the last straw. The plans to execute Jesus took on a new urgency. A few weeks later, we were in Jerusalem, and Jesus celebrated the Passover with us. Lazarus was close to him at the table. Jesus spoke these words. "This is my commandment," he told us, "that you love one another as I have loved you." We nodded, we waited. "No one has greater love than this," he continued, "to lay down one's life for one's friends." In the end, that is exactly what Jesus did for all of us. Yesterday they crucified him. They put him in a rock-hewn tomb, just like the one we buried Lazarus in. And now I have to wonder, will there be someone to call him out from the grave?